bills? You're about to find out. The answer to this question is yes. On this call today are a few hundred people representing funders, policymakers, and many, many nonprofit organizations. For funders and policymakers, we hope you will see the benefit of this type of capacity building initiative. And for those of you representing nonprofits, this presentation will give you a good sense of the training and time involved in building greater financial management capacity, as well as how your organization might benefit based on the experiences of the organizations in this study. It is our hope that the boards, funders, and leaders of nonprofits will see the value of this type of investment. Before we go any further, let me just share a few housekeeping points about today's webinar. We're recording this webinar, and why it's a recording available to you early next week. We will send each of you a link to the recording when it is ready. And since we have a large number of attendees, we have put all the speakers on mute. You can, however, ask a question anytime during the session just by typing in a question in the box to the right of your screen. We've set aside about 20 minutes for the Q&A, and we'll very much look forward to your comments and questions. If you have any problems during the webinar, please feel free to type a note in the question or comment box, and we'll try to help work it out. Finally, if you're on Twitter and want to join a discussion during or after the webinar, please feel free to use the hashtag #SkillsBills. Now, I hope most of you know a little bit about Child Trends, but maybe some of you are new to us. So let me just say a few things. We are the nation's leading center for knowledge on children and youth. We are an independent, mission-driven organization that conducts rigorous research and evaluations, and we communicate this knowledge to help inform policymakers, program administrators, and funders make better decisions. And as you can see here, we work across many different topics and have experts in lots of fields, and happy for you to learn more at childtrends.org. Let me now introduce the speakers for today's discussion. You will first hear from Ed, Director of Research and Evaluation at the Wallace Foundation. Ed joins us from New York City. Our next speaker is Dipti Jain, a principal at Fiscal Management Associates, or FMA. She's also joining us from New York. We have the two lead authors on the call today. Karen Walker, who's with me here in Bethesda, is Deputy Director of Program Implementation Matters and Senior Research Scientist at Child Trends. She will be joined by Jean Grossman, a Senior Fellow at MDRC and also a lecturer at Princeton University in Princeton, New Jersey. And we're very pleased to have Maria Pescada on the call. Maria is the President and CEO of Mujeres Latinas en Acción, or Latin Women Taking Action. This organization is in Chicago, and it's the longest standing Latina human service organization in the United States. And she was one of the participants in the program. Following the prepared remarks, we will have a question and answer, and look forward to your comments and discussion. Okay, Ed, I'd like to turn it over to you to get us started.
Thank you, Frank. And I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm Edward Pauly, Director of Research and Evaluation for the Wallace Foundation, and it's my privilege to introduce today's discussion. As many of you know, the Wallace Foundation has been an active supporter and grant maker in the field of after-school programs for more than 25 years. As part of that work, way back in 2007, Wallace commissioned an important study of the cost of after-school programs, which resulted in a report called The Cost of Quality Out-of-School Time Programs. The project gathered financial data from more than 100 recognized leaders in the after-school field, and we discovered that many of these national exemplars found it difficult to provide accurate financial data. That worried us. We worried about the consequences for children and youth if the organizations that serve them are on shaky financial ground. We saw this not as a financial issue, but as a children's issue. That's because shaky organizations and failing organizations can't do a great job of meeting children's needs. As we learned more about this issue, it became clear that many after-school providers were struggling with financial management issues. And that finding was confirmed in the study Wallace commissioned from Fiscal Management Associates in 2008, called Administrative Management Capacity in Out-of-School Time Organizations. So, in 2009, the Wallace Foundation launched an initiative we called Strengthening Financial Management in Out-of-School Time. The initiative focused on leading OST providers in one major city, Chicago. As we selected the organizations we wanted to support, the effects of the Great Recession intensified, so the stakes were high, and youth-serving organizations nationwide were under great pressure financially. In Wallace's initiative, we asked Fiscal Management Associates to provide two different versions of consulting, training, and support to groups of providers. More program design in a moment. Wallace funded FMA's work with the OST providers over more than 2 years, and Wallace also made grants to the OST providers to cover the costs of new financial software and related expenses. And I want to recognize the great work of my colleague, Wallace's program officer, Polly Singh, who ably led this initiative. Wallace also commissioned a major evaluation so funders and OST providers nationwide could find out what worked and what didn't work in this important project and what it would cost others if they wanted to do similar work. The evaluation was led by Dr. Gene Grossman, who was then at Public-Private Ventures, and PPV published an interim report in 2012 called Building Management. Sadly, PPV was itself a casualty of the Great Recession, and Dr. Grossman moved to MDRC, where the evaluation was successfully completed this year with the collaboration of Child Trends, whose team was led by Dr. Karen Walker. For Wallace, strong after-school programs are essential for our children and youth, especially those most in need. That's why today's webinar is so important, and it's why I'm so happy you've all joined us to learn about the skills to pay the bills. I also want to draw your attention to a related website that Wallace and Fiscal Management Associates created to share the tools and the insights in today's webinar free of charge for all nonprofits. That website is called strongnonprofits.org. We're going to find out how Chicago after-school programs took action to strengthen their financial management. So now I want to introduce Ms. Dipti Jain of Fiscal Management Associates, who led their consulting, training, and support activities to show you what happened in Chicago. Dipti, over to you.
Thanks, Ed. My name is Dipti Jain, and I oversee the national consulting practice at FMA and also oversaw the team that delivered the services in Chicago from 2009 to 2012 in partnership with the Wallace Foundation. First, I'd like to share for all of you the framework of our model. There was a stringent application process. We had about 50 applications, and ultimately 25 organizations were selected to participate in the initiative. By design, we developed two programs that were running pretty much simultaneously. The initiative was a combination of the customized model, which you'll see details on the left, and included 14 organizations over a 4-year period. And there was also a group learning model, which included 11 organizations over a 2-year period. Of the customized model participants, the median budget was about $7 million, so these groups had pretty robust finance functions. And in the group learning model, they were smaller organizations with about a $2.8 million budget. 50% of the organizations were serving youth only, while the other half had about a variety of services that they were providing. And many of the organizations had public funding. Public funding, as we all know, has unique challenges, and those were considered throughout the initiative. There were both differences and similarities between these two models. The customized model involved direct one-on-one consultation with the organizations. We provided a suite of services that began with what we call a fiscal infrastructure review, which is basically an assessment of the systems and processes that were in place when we started. And based on these results of our review and in collaboration with the organizational leaders, we developed a work plan that identified opportunities for improvement that would have a significant impact on the finance function and how it supports the organization as a whole. Teams of FMA consultants worked with the organizations to support them in a very targeted way as had been identified in the work plan. And essentially, we were building the capacity hand in hand with them with the aim of getting them to the next level. And then lastly, but certainly not least, was this idea that we would facilitate quarterly peer learning sessions for the participants. It began with the CEOs and executive directors, and ultimately, upon the request of the CEOs, we added peer learning sessions for the CFOs. And we have found in this initiative and in our other work that it's very critical when you provide these types of opportunities for people to learn from each other. Simultaneously and in parallel with the customized model, we had the group learning model. Here it was not this one-on-one type of intensive work, but it was more of a leadership team structure that allowed the teams to come together to learn best practices within a framework of strategic financial management. And the purpose was to build the team and its capacity to address certain aspects of fiscal management in their organizations. We insisted that the organizational leaders be present and engaged, and we also asked that the finance, development, and program leaders participate. In this aspect and later on, we emphasized building the team's ability to lead in financial management to help ensure impact and lasting change. The group learning model cohort also did an organizational self-assessment, and FMA did a financial health assessment to help them understand their financial story. And although that it was not as customized, they did have their own work plans based on the self-assessment. There were also 8 full-day workshops and one-on-one coaching hours with the leaders of the organizations to help identify some of the concepts that were being delivered in the trainings. The CFO peer learning sessions were also extended to both cohorts. So the CFOs on both sides had the opportunity to build relationships with folks outside of their own initiative. So throughout this initiative, we developed and continue to use now a strategic financial management framework. And really, it's an effort to take a complex concept and break it down into several component parts. So here we define strategic financial management as a process that has 4 components to it. At the core is, in the circle, is the operations function. And it's really this core that needs to be strong and takes a lot of energy from leadership. The question of, do I have the right teams, what technology, process, people in place is what this inside the circle really addresses. Outside of the circle is the process of planning and monitoring, and operations supports that process. Overall, we need a governance structure that oversees and ensures that these processes are all in place and are working the way they should. The planning component is a very important one in our framework. If organizations are clear as to where they are heading and what the steps will be to get there, and particularly in finance, what the resources will be needed to deliver on the plans and actively monitor those plans, and eventually there's a much higher likelihood that they will actually achieve what they set out to do. So we gave a lot of emphasis to the planning and monitoring phase in our work. And in capacity building, one of our biggest worries is that we'll do all this work and we'll leave, and then the work will not actually stick and perhaps not be integrated into an organization's practice or culture. So we do believe that this initiative did have some underpinnings to help ensure that the capacity be built and the culture would change. So there's 4 guiding principles in our work that we believed would be key to achieving lasting change for the long term. We developed first a team-based approach to planning and monitoring, and helped integrate team practices into their day-to-day work. We believe that if a team breaks down the silos and works more interdependently, they can actually adjust to many of the changes in the environment around them. We also emphasized that the financial data that's put before a leadership team, which is the timeliness of it, the accuracy, the identification of the right data, does lead to strategic decision making. So it's not just having the team make the decisions, but the team making the decisions based on data that's timely and accurately presented for that purpose. And in addition, technology has to play a key role in our work. So we saw many instances where staff were working very hard to get something out the door, but it wasn't really the process that they were hoping for or effective. Putting technology in place to ensure that the reporting systems are the best they can be to generate that data and automating processes, particularly in areas with high volume of manual or paper processes, really made a difference from an efficiency standpoint. And finally, there was this idea that you actually have to document the business practices and the new practices. So change is difficult for people, and the more effort that's given to documenting the changes in the way we do things, the higher the chances that those things will actually become normalized. So especially in periods of turnover, which we did see a lot of over the 4 years, having the new practices documented in policies and procedures manuals or job descriptions, new job descriptions, and also integrating the new technology into the policies to ensure that those changes would actually remain with the nonprofit and be carried out more consistently in the long term. So together, these 4 areas were the underpinnings for organizational change in the long term and help make change stick and continue beyond the work with FMA. So I would like now to introduce Karen Walker from Child Trends, who helped lead the evaluation efforts of our work.
Thanks very much, Dipti. A couple of comments before I begin. First, Jean Grossman from MDRC and Princeton University and I are going to switch off on the slides throughout the presentation, so you'll hear our different voices. Second, one of the questions we had going into this research was not only whether or not the initiative would strengthen the organization's financial management, but also whether or not the group learning model, which was much lower cost than the customized one was, could achieve change, which is a critical question. As a preview to the rest of the presentation, I'd like to briefly touch on the overall findings. First, we found that both models led to long-term improvements in financial capabilities, although the customized learning organizations improved more than the group learning organizations, and they did so more quickly. Second, there were indications in the data that the team decision-making outcomes that Dipti discussed as critical to improving financial management were less stable than outcomes that could be reinforced by either documented policies or practices that were built into software. Third, we observed that the more involved and committed the CEO was to the initiative at the initiative's beginning, the more the financial management outcomes in the organization improved by the initiative's end. And fourth, organization staffs reported that improved financial practices improved their program planning, and knowing programs' actual costs, monitoring budgets closely were critical to making wise programming choices. So there were a couple of other major findings. One of the reasons this initiative was useful for organizations that participated was that it helped them better survive some of the worst effects of the Great Recession, such as reduced funding and what was then a very serious problem in Illinois, late state payments for human services contracts. And finally, we concluded that the group learning model appeared to be a cost-effective method of professional development. But as we discuss later, it took longer for the organizations in that model to achieve their outcomes. I'll now turn this over to my colleague, Dr. Jean Grossman, for a few minutes. Jean?
Thank you, Karen. The research effort followed these organizations from the start of their involvement in the initiative until 2014. This time frame allowed us to examine not only what happened during the initiative, but also after. To follow the change process, we surveyed CEOs and CFOs, or lead financial officers, 5 times during the 4-year period at features along the initiative. We also conducted in-person annual interviews with the executive staffs, and as well as financial and program staff. Next slide. The research looked at changes in a large number of financial and organizational outcomes, but this slide gives you a taste of what we found. Before I dive into explaining the results, let me explain what this graph is showing. As I said, we asked the CEOs and CFOs to grade their organizations in many different dimensions. Rather than asking them to use an ABC scale, we asked them to give their grades in a 0 to 9 scale, with 0 being awful and 9 being fabulous. Thus, for example, the first bar on this slide shows that the average grade for the usefulness of software for the customized learning organizations increased almost 2 points on a 9-point scale over the 4 years. If you look across the slide, you will see in general we found that at the end of the 4 years, both the CEOs and CFOs rated their organizations as having stronger financial skills and practices, as well as having program staff being more involved, better skilled, and more involved in the budgeting and monitoring. The improvement was greater for the customized group organizations than it was for the group learning organizations, but both improved. As we'll discuss a little bit later, we think the relatively small improvement that's seen in the usefulness of software and the financial staff skills seen in the group learning organizations may be related to the fact that these organizations did not have sufficient funds to purchase software and training until the 3rd year, when Wallace gave them a second grant. And thus, the organizations may still be improving. Karen, would you like to say more?
Sure. So we observed changes across a range of financial management outcomes, as Jean just showed you. In qualitative interviews, we asked staff in the organizations about the benefits of those changes, and their responses were very much in line with the theory of change that Dipti described earlier. Staff in the organizations noted that more useful software led to more efficient operations. For example, one organization with after-school programs across Chicago automated functions such as payroll and invoicing and cut down on the amount of time that site directors from those programs spent traveling to the main office in downtown Chicago to submit documents. As expected, improvements in software also led to more useful financial reports that could be generated on a regular basis. In turn, reports were used more often, and program staffs were taught to read them, leading to more team decision-making. And more team decision-making, in turn, led to more accurate budgeting and monitoring. Thus, the improvements in financial practices contributed to better program planning, since program staff could tell financial staff what they needed. Financial staff could let program staff know if the funding was available, and development staff could help raise money if it wasn't. Program staff also became more responsible for expenditures, which contributed to less over and underspending on contracts and grants, and that improved relationships both within the organization and with funders. Now, before Jean discusses the time and money that this effort took, I briefly want to note that it took the customized learning organizations less time to reach their ultimate goal compared with the group learning organizations. While customized learning organizations typically reach their ultimate outcomes, that is, the highest outcomes they would reach, by 26 months, it took the group learning organizations 36 months. We think there were a couple of reasons for this. First, the customized learning organizations had to do less trial and error. FMA supplied them with customized tools. And second, as Jean noted earlier, the funding for the initiative varied between the two groups, and the group learning organizations received funds in two disbursements, one at the beginning and one after about 2 years. This meant that they sometimes had to wait until they had the money for software and training, whereas the customized learning organizations received more money from the foundation and received it before they began their work. Jean, back to you.
Yes. So a good question that nonprofits are likely to have is, how much time does it take to do an initiative like this? So we knew this was going to be an important question, so on each survey we tracked the staff time, or the time that staff were spending implementing the work plan that they had developed at the start of the initiative. By the 48th month, staff in the average customized group organization had spent approximately 1,300 hours, while the average group learning organization had spent just under 1,100 hours. But remember that the customized group got their ultimate goals by 26 months, as Karen just mentioned again. If one counts the number of hours that staff invested to achieve those ultimate levels of outcomes, we found that the average customized group organization spent about 830 hours, while the average learning group learning organization spent just under 1,000 hours. So the numbers were not that different. So we concluded that one can achieve sustainable change by investing somewhere between 800 and 1,000 hours over 2 or 3 years. Now, putting dollar values to all the resources that got invested in the initiative, we find that the customized group received about 4 times the amount of professional development and invested about 1.5 times more in staff time. Thus, overall, the customized group received about 2.3 times more resources in their capacity building initiative than were invested in the group learning organizations. Karen, perhaps you might want to sum up.
Okay, sure. So far we've talked about the results of one initiative to improve nonprofit financial management, but we think there are implications for professional development efforts overall. First, it's possible to create long-standing improvements in nonprofit financial management. Compared with this initiative, much professional development focuses on individuals, is much shorter term, and often does not lead to change. In contrast, as we saw in this initiative, a focus on the organization and its leadership contributed to sustained changes. We don't know exactly how long an initiative should last, but we do know that a few hours is not enough because the changes required involved organizational infrastructure, technology, and staff skills, and all of those take time. Second, although the customized learning models may achieve more change faster, they require a lot of resources. Group learning can be a cost-effective alternative to a more customized professional development effort. Third, economic disruptions happen, and management can help nonprofit organizations navigate them. In this initiative, scenario budgeting, increased lines of credit, and understanding programs' actual costs were critical in helping the organizations make wise decisions about the programming. Also, the investments in software and training were costly, but they created efficiencies and they saved time. And when financial reports are clear and staff can easily answer funders' questions, funders' relationships with organizations improve. Finally, at the start of the initiative, organizations reported that program staff often did not have enough knowledge about program budgets, which contributed not only to overspending but also tensions. Program staff said they couldn't make decisions about even modest purchases. Financial and management staff, in turn, said that program staff showed no ownership of their budgets. As the initiative progressed, program staff reported that having more information about budgets and spending helped them better plan their programs, And financial and executive staff reported that program staff demonstrated more responsibility for their budgets than in the past. So, for any organizations that are considering these sorts of efforts, if you're a funder, you should ensure that executive staff have strong motivation to support the effort and that their organizational priorities align with the effort's priorities. This type of initiative takes time, and if leadership doesn't prioritize it, then it's challenging to put all the pieces of the effort together. Similarly, if you're a chief financial officer in an organization, you'll need your executive support to achieve the things you want. This type of effort may also require staff changes. We did not talk about turnover of staff in this presentation. At least we didn't, Dipti did, but it occurred, and it was due both to staff moving on to better things and to executives deciding that staff in key positions weren't committed to the effort. In other words, organizations had to make challenging choices about whether to keep staff. And finally, people come and go in organizations, and changes that rely on staff members' memories and relationships may not survive. Changes need to be reinforced, and one way of doing that is by developing written policies, software that creates changes in workflow, or other strategies for institutionalizing changes. Now, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Maria Pescada of Mujeres Latinas so she can briefly discuss her experiences in the initiative. Maria?
Great. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you all my experience, what took place, what's transpired as a result of this training and ongoing learnings. Well, first of all, it was timely, as someone gave an example of Illinois being coming through a very difficult economic crisis, if you will, for nonprofit organizations. It went around that same time. I recall having just finished the cash flow management training, and as we were looking at the cash flow analysis, one of the things that was discussed was in 6 months, the possibility of a 6-month delay. So to make a long story short, we did some surveys. Some of the coalitions came together and realized this would probably close 90% of the organizations in these particular groups. So as a result, expedited payments were created. Interesting to say expedited payment being 3 months behind, but that happened. I can now look back in the conversations we were having through this process was the importance of using your line of credit. It was basically use it or lose it. And so it was interesting because I can't believe there were days where we didn't have to use our line of credit as often as we do now based on the Illinois situation. So ongoing monitoring, ongoing reviews is important, but also the fact that we were able to train our key staff so that we could have the language and the tools to make the decisions that sometimes were difficult decisions to be made, or the planning that needed to take place. I think overall, as an organization, the fact that we were able to use technology and have the staff training to strengthen our skills really has put us in a situation where I'm glad to say we're in existence. Many organizations in Illinois have suffered some very, very difficult times, and not to say that these aren't difficult times, but at least we can say that we've been able to plan accordingly and have the tools to make the case. In that particular situation, had we not had an actual tool, a process in place, I don't think the state of Illinois would have created the expedited payment process that was necessary to put in place. So just once again to say, I'm glad we went through this process, but it's a continuous process.
Well, thank you, Maria. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on this, and I'd like to also thank all of our presenters. We would invite you now, those listening on the call, if you would like to make a comment or pose a question to one of our panelists, you can simply write that in, and we will start to take these questions. I have a question now from Susie, so thank you for writing in already. Her question is for Karen. We are a much smaller organization than those in the two studies. Will you be addressing ways in which this model can be applied to organizations with, say, 3 to 5 staff and even budgets under $500,000?
Okay, thanks for that question. I might actually ask Dipti to weigh in here, but first I want to say the smallest organization had a budget of not too much more than $500,000. It was $900,000, but that's still a very small budget. And what was really interesting about this initiative was that every organization, except for 2, and those 2 were large, improved. And the smallest organization never reached the level of the larger organizations in terms of the sophistication of its software, but it got much better about managing its finances and became a much more stable organization as a result. It went from not using anything to using Excel. It went from not including staff in any decision making except at the executive director level to ensuring that the financial staff could tell people how what was legal and what wasn't, and how the controls they needed in place to spend money. So why don't I turn it to Dipti now, and she can give some suggestions.
Sure. Yep. So I completely agree with everything that you just said. I just want to note that in addition to some of the smaller organizations in these cohorts, since then we've worked with cohorts of organizations under 500,000, and really all the hallmarks of financial management that we built the model around are the same as we move. It may be a different way that we deliver the material, or a different level of what they specifically need, but at its foundation, it's very much the same, and we really, a lot of those elements remain.
Okay, thank you, Susie, for asking that question. This is a question from Danny, and I think this will go to you, Jean. Are the costs you showed for the initiative per organization, or were they based on per agency cost?
Per cohort.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. Were the costs you showed for the initiative per cohort, or were they based on a per agency cost?
It was per organization, and then we separated out the averages for the customized group and the learning group.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question from Stephanie for you, Dipti. Is the accounting software mentioned in the webinar available free to nonprofits?
So we didn't mention any specifically. The organizations used a variety of softwares, but there's definitely a lot of low-cost software out there that some of the organizations used and are available on TechSoup or other types of services that supply software.
Okay, and I'll just remind everyone listening that the Wallace Foundation has a wonderful site that's available with lots of resources for nonprofits called strongnonprofits.org. Okay, here's a question from Amy for Karen. What does strong motivation look like? What is needed of CEO leadership for greater success?
Okay. So strong motivation exhibited itself early in the initiative when researchers went in and said, why did you decide to participate in this initiative? And people who showed strong motivation said things like, we were so excited because this really aligned with what we need to do right now. Or we were already starting to do some of this work, but we needed some additional help. or we take our financial management very seriously and we just wanted to make sure we were doing everything we could. So that was strong motivation. In terms of strong leadership, in organizations where leaders could make decisions, really tough decisions about staff who might not be the right staff in the right positions to undertake this work, we saw that leaders who could make that decision, those decisions did better. We also saw that leaders who conveyed the importance of this work to their staff in the organization really did a better job at getting people in the organization to carry out the work. So it was when leaders sort of threw up their hands and said, well, I'm not exactly sure what my role in this is, that we didn't see a lot of change.
Okay, thank you for that question. Dipti, here's a question for you. What did FMA learn from these experiences with the nonprofits, and maybe how this knowledge has shaped your curriculum and support for future engagements like this?
Sure. So in addition to the leadership piece that was just discussed, we continue to have a pretty rigorous readiness component of our work, and that is to help ensure that leadership's motivated, but the organization is ready for the change that's going to happen, and it's going to move along with it. I also spoke about the peer elements of the cohorts, and we continue to try to get organizations to talk to each other, get finance staff out of their office and into meeting other folks. And then just the concept of working over time to strengthen their financial management practices. We do try to have initiatives that are over a year in length to help make that change also last.
Okay, thank you. This is a question for you, Ed, from Misha. The question is, are there any plans to perform another study with nonprofit organizations that's similar to this?
Thanks, Frank. Wallace's current focus is on sharing the lessons and the tools from this work, which we think have been really well captured in the MDRC and Child Trends report, finding that this kind of training can be a very productive investment in building nonprofit capacity that really lasts. We think it's a great report to share with potential funders, with your board of directors, with organizational leaders. And the tools that FMA has developed are available to all nonprofits free of charge at strongnonprofits.org. And that includes free budget templates and much more. It's a great site for you to explore. And given these resources, we actually don't think it's necessary at this point to do another study. This study really got the evidence that we thought was needed and will be very useful to people.
Okay, this is a question from Adrian, and I maybe will ask Dipti or Jean if you have a thought on this, but he's asking, I represent a smaller organization as well, similar to our previous listener, and the question is, how might we join or start a group model in our area? Good question. Any thoughts?
Dipti, I'll let you.
Sure. So, definitely thinking about how you want to develop a peer network, whether it's by similar services or by budget size or by geography. Just thinking about who you would include in that, and you could start informally, just getting together more of a round table way, and potentially with a facilitator or having ongoing knowledge and learning over a period of time, and see where that goes.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for everyone for asking all the questions and comments. So I'd like to just wrap up. We'll wrap a little bit earlier, so I know that's always a good thing. So I'd like to first thank all of our speakers, and we're particularly the Wallace Foundation for having the vision and commitment to undertake such an extensive project over so many years. this knowledge will be useful for other funders and organizations that work with nonprofits. Yes, this type of training can be expensive and time-consuming, as you heard, but it's also well worth the investment, and the research showed that today. We also want to thank each of you that joined on the call today. You all play key roles in the success of the nonprofits that you lead, and we know you address many important social issues that our nation faces, as well as supporting the many things that make our work better and more enjoyable. Your work is so important. It is critical that your organizations are well managed today and in the future. And we do hope this knowledge shared on the call and on the website, strongnonprofits.org, will be of lasting value to you. And as a reminder, we will provide a recording of this webinar and make the slides available. You'll get a notice about that in a few days. And we hope you have a great day. Thank you very much.